Hi everyone and welcome to Dennis Deep Cuts, the 40th installment of this fine YouTube series. Today we're going to talk some more about Swedish punk rock. Let's see what happens. So one of the first episodes I ever did, I talked about Swedish punk and I gave people a little bit of an introduction to Swedish punk rock, and then I showed a bunch of my more obscure 7-inches. And I'm going to do a little bit of a follow-up on that. You can check out the first episode here, and then you get a little bit ABC about Swedish punk. But today we're just going to dig into a bunch of random and obscure 7-inches in alphabetical order. Per usual, I will do a playlist below where I will add more Swedish punk to the Swedish punk playlist. Next week, we'll see if there's an episode. I mean, I'm shooting this like a couple of hours before I'm going on tour with Invasion. So when this episode airs, well, it's on YouTube so you can watch it, whatever. But when it premieres, I will be on tour somewhere in Europe. So we'll see if I can find a time to do another episode after that. Maybe, maybe not. Come and say hi to Invasion. We're on tour, and let's dig into some Swedish punk rock 7-inches from the 70s and early 80s. Let's do it. Last episode I showed you, last episode about Swedish punk, I showed you a couple of cool books about Swedish punk, and there's a brand new book about Swedish punk that just came out, and it's called Råpunk, The Birth of Swedish Hardcore. It's not that many bands that I'm going to talk about today is included in this excellent book, but maybe one or two. It's a beautiful book with tons of amazing photos of Swedish punk from 81 to 89. So check it out. It's a really, really cool book. But let's get into some punk rock 7-inches. The first one I'm going to show you in alphabetical order, of course, is ABC 80 from 1980. They were from Karlshamn, a small town in the south of Sweden. They put out this fantastic 7-inch called Pop on the Radio, Pop I radion. They weren't one of those bands, they weren't like full-on punks, but they were into the punk idea, and I think they sound more like The Jam or XTC or something like that. But I love the title track of the 7-inch as a complete banger. They put out one more 7-inch, and then they broke up or faded into obscurity or whatever bands do when they break up. But this 7-inch is really worth checking out if you ever see it. Next band I'm going to talk about is from Stockholm. They're called Bädders. This one's from 1979. Bädders were one of the more popular punk bands in Stockholm at that time. They played a whole slew of shows, and this is a pretty killer 7-inch. It's very typical Swedish punk, but title track Droga för våga, which means you got to do drugs to dare, I guess, is a complete killer track. They put out one more 7-inch that's pretty good, and then they got signed to a big Swedish record label, but then they broke up, which happens. Also, the last song, Greasers Give Up or Ragged Ge Upp, is a pretty good punk rock track. It's kind of like a standard Swedish late 70s, early 80s type of punk, but really well done. I really like the 7-inch, and it's a cool little piece of plastic. The next 7-inch is also from 1979, but this is from down south in Malmö. It's called Besökarna. This 7-inch is great, dark and brooding, and kind of like really propulsive and cool. A really cool Farfisa organ that sort of sets the tone for the music plays. I love it. When I did the first episode, I talked a little bit about Kriminella Gitarrer, which was the first Swedish punk rock 7-inch ever released. And the singer Stry went on to do Besökarna. They only did this one 7-inch, and then after they broke up, there was another 7-inch released, and then 2 years ago maybe, a fantastic record store in Malmö called Rundgång released an LP of all their stuff, I think, like demos and unreleased stuff, and that's really worth checking out. A couple of these people went on to form the band Garbo that I've also talked in another episode. That's a fantastic sort of post-punkish kind of band, and you could hear a little bit traces of that in Besökarna, and yeah, this is just a fantastic 7-inch. So the next band might be in the book, probably in the book, they're in the book. It's Head Cleaners, or Huvudtvätt, from Sundsvall. Last episode I talked about mass media, and when mass media broke up, a couple of the guys started Huvudtvätt, or Head Cleaners, and this is raw, like kind of insane hardcore, as I like to call it, really fast hardcore. Really Fast was, of course, a series, compilation series that was done in Sweden, where it, you know, gather all the punk and hardcore of the day, and the first couple of outings of that series is fantastic, and a lot of the band sounds kind of like the Head Cleaners. They only did one show in 1982. This 7-inch is from 1981. They released 4 7-inch and 1 split LP. That's very sought after, and even though the band was, I mean, it was a proper band, but they did it mostly when they had their time, and they never really, as I said, they only played 1 show live. They were quite influential in that whole raw punk scene with bands like Anti-Cimex and Head Cleaners, or Huvudtvätt. And this is a fantastic little EP with noisy, violent hardcore, the way you love it. So the next band I want to talk about is a local band. They were active when I got into punk. I think maybe a lot of their activities fizzled out by the time I started playing shows, but they were definitely one of those bands that were around. I'm talking about The Join. They put out 1 7-inch called Total Tystnad in 1987. In this time period, there wasn't a whole lot of punk happening. The heydays of Swedish, or the first wave of Swedish punk, was like 1979 to 1982, and then from the mid 80s you had, like, as I talked about before, the really fast hardcore with all the like raw punk type of bands. But this sort of like typical just punk rock wasn't very popular, especially not in 1987. The 7-inch is cool. They were supposed to open up for a big band from Stockholm, and they rushed it, so I think maybe it's not mastered, or there's something about it, it just sounds weird. There's no low end to it. But that being said, someone that grew up here and heard those songs early on, I kind of love this 7-inch, and they're singing about a cafe called Cafe Pastel that's just like, it was around when I got into punk, and they hate it because I guess that all the non-punks are hanging out there. So it's a cool 7-inch, kind of, I wouldn't say generic, but just like typical Swedish punk, but they did it in 1987, so it's a little bit later than the first wave of punk rock, but yeah, The Join, cool band. The next band I'm going to talk about is probably the most well-known band out of this batch of 7-inches, and it's Lädernunnan, or the Leather Nun, as they're called. Leather Nun was from Gothenburg, even though the singer was very much a Stockholm dude, but he moved down to Gothenburg in the 70s, where he started Leather Nun. And Leather Nun was one of those bands when they first came around with the Slow Death EP. They got in touch with like the Throbbing Gristle people, and their first 7-inch is actually released on Industrial Records. So they became a part of that scene and that world. And then this is their second 7-inch from 1981, and the song Ensam i natt, I think is top 5 Swedish punk rock songs ever written. The Leather Nun went on to have a pretty long career. changed the sound from like industrial noisy rock and roll to more just rock and roll, but still pretty great. Toured with bands like Echo and the Bunnymen, and they released a whole slew of albums. And they still play shows on and off. They did a show right before the pandemic that I think got released on vinyl. And they're pretty cool. Leather Nun all across the board is pretty cool. It's definitely worth checking out. But I love this 7-inch. I love that song. And yeah, great, fantastic. Next band I want to talk about is from Stockholm, Pink Champagne, one of the few bands that was like an all-girl band from this period of time. I talked about this on the previous episode, where there's not a whole lot of women involved in this scene, but they're a good example of the women that were involved. They were a band from 1979 to 1984. This is their first 7-inch from 1980, and it's produced by Thåström and Fjodor from Ebba Grön, which was at that time the biggest punk band in Sweden, and to this day, if you live in Sweden, they're still the biggest punk band in Sweden. They put out a couple of 7-inches, maybe 4 of them, and they put out some albums, and they toured, and they were one of those bands that were like on the touring circuit. I think the early 80s a bit more punk rock, and then they just became like a new wave rock band. But they're still great across the board. The singer, well, actually 2 of the people in the band moved to Australia because they started dating people from the band The Church. And the singer and songwriter of Pink Champagne actually helped write the lyrics to The Church mega hit Under the Milky Way, which is kind of cool. And then Steve Kilbey from The Church has 2 kids together with Karin, and they play in a pretty cool and semi-famous Swedish pop band called Say Lulu, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was a cool, weird connection that Steve Kilbey had a Swedish wife that used to play in a punk band, and yeah, I thought that was a little bit of an interesting footnote. So if you like The Church, you can check out Steve Kilbey's wife's band, Pink Champagne. Yep. So the next band is from even further up north than we live. They're from a small town called Piteå. They're called Rocksets. If you think you've heard of the city Piteå, it might be because of my good friends Randy the band. They're from Piteå as well. This is way before this. This is from 1979. Rockset wasn't really a punk rock band per se. They were kind of more just a rock and roll band, but they had some punk influences. And this, their first 7-inch, is called Piteå kommun, which is like, you know, the city of Piteå basically. And that song is a complete killer. I love it so much. They ended up putting out 2 more 7-inches, and I think they broke up maybe in the early 90s or something like that. They're banned for a very long time. The other couple of 7-inches are fine, but not very punk. But this is like, this is a super cool 7-inch, and that Piteå kommun track is such a killer track, and I'm glad that I got my hands on this quite recently. It's a great 7-inch. Next band is from Södertälje, which is a town just south of Stockholm, and I'm talking about the band Terror. And no, I'm not talking about the hardcore band Terror, but I'm talking about the Swedish punk band Terror, or as they were called, Terror 77. This is very Clash-esque punk rock, but both songs are pretty cool, and they're one of those bands. They're like a functioning touring band that did a lot of they played a lot of shows, but right as they were supposed to, I guess, record their second 7-inch, a couple of the guys started playing in a glam rock band called Friday's Angels, and they won some rock competitions. So the punk band slowly faded into obscurity. There's also rumors that one of the guys had to flee the country and was Interpol was searching for him or something like that, which is, you know, a good enough excuse to break up a band, I guess. But they left behind one pretty cool 7-inch with two pretty cool tracks, and you gotta love a song called Johnny Rebel. So Terror, or Terror 77 as they were called, from 1982. So off the coast of Sweden, you have two islands, Öland and Gotland, and these guys were from Visby and Gotland, where they every year have the big jousting, you know, medieval fairs. I don't think these guys were ever involved in that. They're called Urban Släke. Also one of those bands that they weren't necessarily like a full-on punk band. They were more like a political rock band, but their first 7-inch from 1981 is just phenomenal. The first track is called Svensk, so jävla svensk, which means Swedish, so fucking Swedish. The lyrics are awesome. I mean, both songs are great. They're one of those bands, they started in Visby in Gotland, and they moved to Stockholm. They played a good 150 shows. There's one more 7-inch out, but that's it, and it's not that punky. But this first 7-inch is phenomenal and really worth seeking out. All right, the last 7-inch I'm going to show you. They're a band from Hovmanstorp. I did not know where that was, but it's a small town outside of Växjö. Växjö is a good music town, some good bands from there, and you can play some good shows there in the 90s and 2000s. And they're called Von Gam. This one's released in 1982, and it's one of those snotty, kind of like garage rocky punk rock 7-inches, and I really like it. It's quite a new acquirement in my collection. They're also one of those bands that they played a lot of shows. They played between 150 to 200 shows. And it's great. It's a great 7-inch, and they're one of those bands. I think they only released this one 7-inch, which is a shame, because it's a cool, one of those snotty, yeah, an energetic type of 7-inches. Von Gam. And there you have it, 10 Swedish punk rock 7-inches. All these tracks will be added to the playlist. And thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, do stuff like that, and tell your friends so I can keep plugging away on this YouTube channel. Until next time, stay wild, my friends. Bye-bye.